me a chance to smell. I sit down right there beside her. 7 long years I loved her well. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Kissed her, the more I loved her. The more I kissed her, the more she smiled. I forgot my mother's teaching. Nancy Whiskey had me beguiled. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy Whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy Whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. I rose early in the morning, quenched my thirst, it was my need. Tried to rise, but I was not able. Nancy Whiskey had me by the knees. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy Whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy Whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Surely make them shuttles fly. I made more as a Carlton Weaver than I ever did in this roving trade of mine. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy Whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh.